So I'm just shooting a bit of quick footage here. This is Reluctant Enemies, part of the Operational Combat series by MMP, and this is my new attempt to play Reluctant Enemies with some anti-cat protection now in place. So I am hoping that this piece of sort of tubular anodized steel tubing or whatever it is, plus this mesh welded onto it, is going to protect the play area sufficiently that I can just carry on gaming and then cover it up and not end up with my counters being eaten and my game being wrecked and trashed and everything. You can see the sort of reinforcement manifests under there with the counters, some of the counters still under there, and you know the map under here. But we'll see how it goes. You know, this is a first test. I've only just got this stuff, just set the game up, set this stuff up on it, and let's see whether it does the job of protecting my game. If it does, then I'm going to be able to crack on and start playing some much longer stuff, which is really nice. I've got another sheet of mesh over there. So yeah, I should be able to cover quite a large, most of my table, if it needs protecting. Obviously on a one map game like Reluctant Enemies, it's not too much of a tight squeeze, and there's lots of empty space. But I'm hopeful at the moment that I can now game and leave games set up and get away with it. So let's see. So I'm here in the first turn of Reluctant Enemies, the campaign game, which I'm hoping to get through now that I have some protection for the board. So what's going on here on the coast? The Commonwealth moved up and tried to overrun that cavalry, and as you can see failed quite badly, and the remnants of their force had to retreat. You can also see some of the cat damage from previous plays on that Royal's armoured cars. You can see the tooth marks and so on. I can show you that on a number of counters actually. But anyway, so the Commonwealth lost their first unit there and had to retreat smartly and just moved their artillery up and a machine gun unit to sort of block off the road, and that was them in the centre. I rolled randomly to see where the special forces, the beach landings, would happen. I decided to give the Commonwealth a random roll, so I didn't second guess myself, and so I could just put the Vichy down where I thought was sensible and then have a random roll. And would you know it, they rolled the first hex here. I rolled a D8 and a D6 so that it randomised 16 hexes. You know, a D8 for 1 to 8, and then a D6 for either +0 or +8. Essentially a D2. Never mind. Anyway, a completely random roll, equal chances for all 16 hexes up the coast here, and would you know it, they roll a 1 on the D8 and a 1 on the D6 and end up landing straight in here, and then drifts 1 south, 1 stays where it is, and 1 north. They've landed some supply under there, and so they've got this beachhead across the Litani River, despite this dreadful result in the overrun down here. How long it'll last, I don't know. Naval fire from both the cruiser and the destroyer DG'd that unit there, and they may end up taking the Litani River here, depending on what happens. What else have we got? In here, there was some combat. There's a cavalry unit that starts in that Benet Jibal. That got taken out by these guys here. Some movement up the road, the HQ moving up, and some move to engage in here by some Australians, and then yeah, fairly standard moves round here to attack that cavalry unit in there, which may withdraw. They sent some bombers in at their bombers in at that that cavalry unit to try and disrupt it, but disorganise it, but no such luck. So that's the end. That's the sort of Commonwealth moves. I've got reaction movement to do now. The Vichy started with a reserve marker on their all their forces down here in this place at Swady, I think it's called, and up in South Damascus, and then this nice pair of units here on the coast just north of Sudan. So they've got some reaction to do, and then we will continue on with the Commonwealth turn. But each time I play this is the third time I've played this opening turn, and it just throws up some new situations every single time. So I'm really looking forward to this now, seeing how this usually when I selected a hex, I think I selected something north of Sudan, and when I rolled randomly last time, I think I got a hex right up here north of Damour, which was cutting supply all the way down the coast, but of course leaving the special forces, the Commonwealth Special Forces, very, very vulnerable. So I'm really interested to see how it works out with this landing around here, right next to the Litani River. I would have, as the Commonwealth player, I would have much preferred them all to be stacked together, or possibly two stacked where the 253 is, and two of them here, not spread out like this, but south of the Litani River is a bit painful. But still, interested to see how that works out. Here with reluctant enemies, end of the Commonwealth portion of the turn for the first turn, and yeah, interesting stuff going on across the board. Here on the coast, this landing by the Special Forces has been something of a success. The Vichy released this rather impressive armour unit, which rolled down the road and overran a lone 243 Special Forces Marine. But the remaining two counter-attacked into an infantry unit that had been DG'd by the Royal Navy, sat in the hex to the empty hex there to their right. And although it was a 1-to-1 attack, they had an AR of 5 against 2, rolled a surprise, got 5-column shift, rolled something like a 8 or 9, and that was all she wrote. That firstly allowed them to advance into hex and join up into stack together, and secondly it gave them some exploitation movement to move back into the coastal hex to so where they can receive some supply if they last long enough, receive some supply from the Royal Navy. So they're putting in a fighting shift to maintain a bridgehead across this Litani River, which is a real choke point the Commonwealth have to try and cross. If they could have got this cavalry out of the way with this opening attack, they'd be in a very strong position, because yeah, presumably they'd have been right up here against this river line with a bridgehead across it. As it is, they've still got that headache to deal with, and the Vichy now get to try and get rid of these pesky Marines before this force down here shows up. So on the coastline, that's what happened. Inland, this big stack of Commonwealth stack got DG'd by the Vichy Air Force, and so wasn't able to make an attack. So the Commonwealth held off from expending any resources, like firing this artillery, which just seemed like a waste of time. And in here, I forgot to make the attack, realised too late. The Vichy had already started their turn. I'd rolled supply and refitted aircraft and stuff, and decided not to allow them to take it back. So, too bad, I forgot. If they really, I mean, it's not as if there's much around that can reinforce that Vichy cavalry unit, so it either toughs it out and they can attack it next turn, or it withdraws back somewhere where it can try and find some supply. And down here
yeah, again, it was another situation where the Commonwealth hadn't really got the strength to attack that cavalry unit, the 435 cavalry unit. They could have had a 2-to-1 attack. The artillery was too weak to fire at it, and they're just not willing to risk some of their best units on bad 2-to-1 attacks when they've got a huge stack of reinforcements about to appear here next turn. So that seemed like it would have been a waste of resources for them to risk troops and spend supply on those kind of attacks, and so chose not to. But it's a question right now of what happens up here on this coastal road, whether the Vichy can force these Marines back or get rid of them and retake this Litani River line, or whether the Allies are going to forge across there and be threatening further up the road this early in the game. So let's see what happens.
Start of the second turn in Reluctant Enemies, and the first turn wasn't the most action-packed, but I think favoured the Commonwealth fairly heavily, probably after their ill-fated opening attack on the cavalry on the coastal road. Things went much better for them, and the main thing that went right for them was that these special ops guys, the special forces who'd made the beach landings just north of the Litani River, held on against a combined attack by this group. They got surprised. They got 3 or 4 column shifts in their favour, and only a moderate dice roll. The result came out an option on each side, and the Vichy weren't willing to lose that 846 armour unit to force perhaps a loss or a retreat, probably a loss. But the Commonwealth would still have held a hex, and that would have been a significant unit to lose simply to knock off one of these Commonwealth guys. And I think because the cavalry retreated, these Commonwealth special forces are now in trace supply and will therefore leave next turn. I think they can trace supply back down the road, and there's nothing in the way. So I think we've reached the point where they leave play. I think the turn following the point where they can trace. So yeah, that's a big breakthrough for the Commonwealth, and a very early breakthrough, because they've won initiative and are now going to be able to get up this road across the Litani River, which is the first major choke point that they have to get through. So to get it so early, very good news for them. Stalled out in the middle of the map here, not a lot going on, basically mainly because that group of units, that brigade there, was DG'd by aircraft. And over here, over in the desert side, the Vichy start with quite a significant force here in Swedia, and that's always, and quite a big depot, and the combination of the two has always what made me wonder what to do with those. Are they meant to stick around and try and fight it out? And if they do, they're in quite a strange place, because the natural axis of advance for the Commonwealth is up this rail line and up this road straight up there, following the rail track and the road up to Damascus here. So for there to be a significant force off to the side here, you wonder quite what you're supposed to be doing with it. Well, this time round, I decided that irrespective of the presence of 3 or 4 points of supply, 3.5, whatever starts in there, those troops were essentially going to withdraw back towards Damascus, and I was going to build a more viable defence along the
railroad and the road here, pretty much abandon this, and then if that gave me spare troops, then I'd have stuff to rail back round, perhaps into another theatre. So that's what I'm choosing to do for the Axis this time round. So these, apart from protecting the dump there at Swedia and maybe then blowing it, these guys are going to ship out and form this initial perimeter as the Commonwealth start pressing forward. And the Commonwealth down here, they don't look like they've got a lot, but all those blue Free French, essentially that brigade is going to come on here, roughly where the airfield is. So there's suddenly going to be a lot of pressure down here. So that's the sort of strategy I've chosen for the Axis this time round, and we'll see. Well, just see how that works out. But I'm not going to be left with a conundrum of a large force left here with nothing to fight, or just being bypassed as the Commonwealth carry on up the road. I do seem to remember that I tried to think that maybe a force here could threaten a quick dash down towards Amman for the sort of auto victory, but really, I mean, I think I tied up a lot of forces there on a sort of wishful thinking kind of strategy, whereas this might be a lot more practical, less romantic, but actually more worthwhile in the end. So I'll see how it goes for them this time. But yeah, advantage to the Commonwealth at the moment because of the breakthrough on the coast. Coming into turn 3 then here in Reluctant Enemies, and the Commonwealth during turn 2 were able to consolidate on the north side of the Litani River, and the Vichy made a decision, having seen this position, to pull back to Sidon and concentrate their forces around this river line here, where they've got some good artillery dug in behind, and so they withdrew towards that position. It looked like a better bet than trying to defend this open terrain on this coastal road, where that didn't really seem particularly worthwhile. But they're still going to throw, I think, some speed bumps in the way to make this approach difficult. Standoff in the sort of central region around Merjayun, nothing much happened here. Again, the Commonwealth looked at an attack into this infantry battalion here, but it really wasn't that favourable, and with more forces moving up and some artillery, they thought they'd save the supply until they had a better attack. Out here in the sort of desert area, things are really still in a very formative stage, taking shape. You can see a defensive line forming up in these hills south of Damascus, but along this sort of road and railway line, there's just forming up really happening with this as this Free French force starts to move up against the Vichy. So still very much in the early stages out there. Yeah, that's the state of play at the end of turn 2. The Cat Protector has worked for 2 nights in a row. Absolutely no damage or disruption to the board at all. So very pleased about that. I'm gonna stop this one here, I think, and upload it.